You're listening to the Broadway Podcast Network.
There's a cat over here. There's a cat over there. And the wrong one died. And the wrong one died.
Welcome to The Wrong Cat Died, the podcast breakdown of the catastrophe. I'm your host, Mike Abrams, and today we have another amazing guest. He was Pouncival and the magical Mr. Mistoffelees on the 5th U.S. National Tour of Cats. So welcome, Shane Hall, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have you here. You kind of teed up a few things that I have not heard about, so I'm excited to hear some new stuff today, and we'll get to that because it's very Mistoffelees related. But before we get to that, first question always is: you did the show in the early 2000s,
yes,
not long after the 1998 movie.
Yes,
I also read that you got to see it and you knew you had to be in it as a kid. So, like, what was your introduction to Cats?
My intro to Cats was the studio of a small town dance studio takes a trip of dancers to New York City for a week or whatnot. And that was our group Broadway show, was to see Cats. I didn't know much about it. I knew it was a dance-based show. I had never been to New York. I think I was 14 at that time. So that would have been 1994. Okay. And so we did the Broadway Dance Center stuff and took class, walked around, did the shopping. And of course, with our group, we went to see Cats and at the Winter Garden, which was a treat. And I remember getting through Act 1 and just being so enamored. And Act 2 came around and I fell asleep, actually. The pirate section of the show sort of zonked me out for a moment. I was like, what is going on here? And then fast forward to the end of the McCavity fight, etc. And I wake up and then there's this sparkly magical cat that has appeared on stage. And so my whole attention was based in that. And I thought, oh my God, I have to do this role. Mm-hmm. And I waited at the stage door. Jacob Brenton was the current Mistoffelees at that time. Mm-hmm. And we took gobs and gobs of pictures. And of course, as any young dancer would say to someone of that caliber and that stature and their position, I want to be you when I grow up. And I graduated high school in 1998 and actually auditioned for the Broadway company before it closed at 18 years old, which is a neat story. And I was thinking about that yesterday, that now in the world, we have all these great audition centers, Open Jar, Pearl, Ripley Greer, the list goes on. But back then in 1998, I say back then as if I'm ancient, but yeah. Back then, I actually auditioned on a Broadway stage. We auditioned on the Longacre Theater stage, and it was a really neat experience at 18 years old to do that, because that's just not a thing anymore. The stages are utilized for the show now specifically, and there's no auditions on that. So that was kind of my first intro to Cats, was with my dance studio.
Yeah, so I have two follow-ups, but I want to go, they're very different. So I'm fascinated by that part of the audition. So as not an actor, not a performer, I knew that there were the studios, mostly just because of, my TikTok algorithm is very theater heavy. And it does show up a lot of like, hey, we're heading here, we're doing this call, we're doing that call. And there's also self-tapes now, post-COVID.
Of course.
Of like COVID base. But you got to actually go on to, like, the audition was a Broadway stage. Like, they bring you in there and it's got the table in the middle of the orchestra center, and they're all sitting there watching you.
Yes. So we actually, of course, the show was being, running at the Winter Garden, but we auditioned down the street at the Longacre Theater. And so I was 18. My dad actually drove me from Alabama to New Jersey, where his foster brother lived. And then we took a bus in. So again, second trip to New York ever. And I'm auditioning for a Broadway show. And got there. My dad went down into the theater with me, which is a unique little story. I'm adopted, and my dad was my champion for me. And he waited in the waiting area, which I guess would have been a green room space in the theater. And then they took us up in groups, and we did 4 or 5 different combinations that day, starting with a type out, the double pirouette, say your name, yes or no, you're kept or not, because there were so many people. There were so many people. And then from there, I would go back down. And my dad would say to me, well, how'd it go? And all he knew was either you get kept or you don't. Like, he didn't know much about the industry. And same for me, actually. So I kept saying, oh, they've asked me to stay and do something else. And so I would go back and then come down, go back and come down. And by the end of the day, I think I had made it to some, 8 or 9 people that were left. And they took some measurements. They took a Polaroid of me. And that was while the company was still running right before it closed. I did not make that company, but what an experience that I hold on to, especially, saying that about that time, because like I said, the Broadway stage auditions are just not of today's society and not of today's industry. So
yeah, it's just a totally different world of that. Like they now are, which is, I don't know which is better or worse. It's probably a really cool experience for you as a performer to do it that way, but it's probably like horrifically for the economics of trying to run a business.
Of course.
Trying to have everybody do it there when you've got a pre-built studio for it.
Of course.
All right, so my other follow-up.
Yeah.
When you see it at 14.
Yeah.
14 is the age. Like that's the almost exact time where I'm like, you're going to get a lot of the craziness that you're watching. You're going to understand maybe some of the like over the top sexual innuendos that are in this show.
Sure.
But, but also not at a point where you're an adult and can process that at the same rate. So like, did you recognize how sexual and crazy and some of the back plot of the story is when you're watching? I guess you fell asleep through half of it, so maybe not. But like at a 14-year-old, like how much of that did you recognize?
Zero, because all I looked at was, I can kick my leg like that. I can do jumps like that. I can bend backwards like that. I've always been enamored with cats. The animal, the idea of it. I grew up with Batman, the Adam West, Burt Ward Batman series. And of course, Catwoman was always one of my favorites. Going into the later Tim Burton movies, Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman, there was just always something about the felinity of the movement and the quality of the animal that I was drawn to. That's all I noticed, was that I can do those skills. And if I can't do those skills, I'm going to work hard because I know I can get that skill. And that's what I noticed.
Yeah. So the more I'm like thinking about this, I've had way too many episodes thinking about this and talking to people about this, but like you went as a dance group to watch a dance heavy show. And so I'm assuming most of y'all are sitting there going, let's watch the dance numbers and all the stuff that we've learned and all the different pieces. Whereas I can't dance, I can't sing. So I went there and watched what story was I told. And I noticed a lot. But as an adult. So that's where I'm always fascinated by this. Like, what does a 14-year-old recognize of the ball and the coming of age story of Victoria?
Of course.
And all the stuff that now, having been in it.
Well, there's even so many details that I would have never picked up on looking at it just from an audience eye, that when I got into rehearsal, I learned that there were kittens, there were older cats, there were purebred cats. Certain collars meant certain things for each cat. Then, of course, the relationships, possible relationships between cats, etc. And it was like, wow, I would have never known that. And maybe that's sort of internal for us as a cat family or tribe, if you will, to know. But there were so many neat things that going into the rehearsal space, learning the show specifically. And I actually learned the show with just one other cast member because I joined in the midst of a tour. So it was just me, another cast member joining with me, and the dance captain of the show, learning the show in the basement of the Pantasia's Theater in Los Angeles. So that's kind of how I learned the show. And then, of course, being thrown into it because they were already in session in their contract. So I didn't go through the specific details of all that. It was like, let me get you the show taught. Let's track the show, learn the makeup, learn the vocals, and let's throw you in. That was kind of my process. But then going back to New York for the second year with a brand new tour group, that's when I learned the details, of course, but in the rehearsal process, there was time to talk about it and to get all the new family of cats, cast members up to date on what we're doing and what story we're really telling. That, again, hopefully the audience will see or get, but maybe not. But that was the goal.
Yeah, that's interesting because the first time you're coming in mid tour's replacement in 2003 as Pouncival, who was the other character that you were rehearsing with? Do you remember?
So it was interesting. When I got the call, I was called in as a swing. They offered me a swing position. And I was like, yes, because all I wanted to do was do cats. And I had previously with the company booked Starlight Express. And I was like so excited. And then I had a mentor that was on Broadway that was like, no, Shane, you can't do that tour. The offer's not great, so on and so forth. We'll leave it at that. So I was like, no, it's my first tour. That's the goal. And then a few weeks later, I got offered Cats because I auditioned for it at the same time during a trip to New York. And going into it was very interesting as a swing because I wasn't exactly sure what that meant. And I was trying to explain it to my parents as well because they were like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
My dad specifically. And I was like, well, I don't think I'm on stage every night. I think when somebody's sick or hurt, I'm going to know a couple parts and then I'm going to go on. And then the very next day, I got the call about, hey, one of the cast members is dealing with some injury, shin splints, so on and so forth, and wants to make sure that they can finish the contract. Would you be interested in swapping to a on-stage character and then let that person go into the swing position to monitor just their body and health, of course? And I was like, sure, that sounded great too. So regardless, I was, game for whatever. I didn't know who Pouncival was from a hole in the wall. Yeah. I just knew that at that point I was specifically going to do Pouncival, and that was an immediate first cover for Mistoffelees. And so once I got the Pouncival track down, there was so much similarity to that track to the Mistoffelees track that it was easy to just learn the specialty solo and then go on. And I was thrown into Mistoffelees pretty quickly. And through that time, I performed Mistoffelees more often than I did Pouncival.
Wow. Okay. So so you were going on as Mistoffelees in the first year.
Yeah.
Even before it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So how far into the swing process did you get before you became Pouncival? Like, did you know a couple other tracks?
I never learned. I would have covered what they call the kitten swing. So that would have been Mungo Jerry, Tumble Brutus, Mistoffelees, Pouncival. I never learned specifically any other track than Pouncival and Mistoffelees. Like I never learned the Mungo Jerry duet. I never learned the Victoria lift for Tumble Brutus or any of that kind of stuff. It was immediately, the swing thing was deleted out of my existence. Pouncival was the next thing. And then let's get that down and let's get you taught Mistoffelees. So I never did any of the swinging at all in the show.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about the difference between coming in midway through and then having the whole rehearsal process.
Yeah.
When you're coming in midway through as Pouncival, what did they tell you from a story perspective? Because I'm sure like a lot of this is just don't get somebody injured, come in and do the role, make sure you got the dance numbers and all the staging and where you need to go. But there is a little bit of like, you kind of still need to know a little bit about who Pouncival is. So how much did you get in that?
I knew that Pouncival was definitely a kitten, rambunctious, young, very curious, of course. And so the makeup plot obviously offers into that. And then the way I would crawl or the way that I would interact with other cats needed to be that. And I needed to understand who were more housebred cats, who were older cats around me, who I might play with and who I might not play with, who might be a little more standoffish to me or quote unquote hiss at me, or who would not, So those were really the foundations of me learning Pouncival. Was he was just a playful young cat with just wide-eyed curiosity. So that's basically what I went into it with.
Yeah. And then you go as Mistoffelees.
Yeah.
In that same thing before this rehearsal full process. Yeah. So when you're making that quick transition, like obviously there's some, there's the dance and there's the overlap of that. Course. But then again, same kind of question. When did they talk, like, how do they tell you that story?
I truly don't know that I ever had a Mistoffelees foundation. And I hate to say that. I think I went into it based on what I saw. And I had some wonderful people that performed it right in front of me on the tour. Obviously, having seen it from the video and seeing Jacob's interpretation of it, having worked with Gillian Lynn so specifically on that, I think I made my assumption of that he's sophisticated, he's a little more refined, he's a little more aloof. He just has an exquisiteness about him. And I tried to make him, as I danced the role, very sleek, very, I guess the word refined, he had a gestural, postural stance about him at all times that was not so much better than others, but just, I'm more elegant, I'm more put together, especially when you come out in that costume, it puts a different placement to the character with that. So I basically kind of found it alone, really.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess having done the show a bunch, you have a here's how I got to, as Pouncival, interact with this Mistoffele who's doing it. And then you get to kind of recreate it and then build it as you go. So it's like, let's take their version that you've seen and then also then add your own moments as you start a new body.
Yeah.
So then fast forward to that, you get to do a full another year's rehearsal in 2004. Did you have kind of like the powwow, sit down, tell the whole story with the whole new cast?
No. No, because there were 7 of us that stayed on from that current leg of the tour to go back to New York. And they told us that we didn't need to come in the first couple of days of rehearsal because we were already familiar with the show. They wanted to get some things taught, and they would integrate us into what was already on that new cast with them on their feet.
Yeah.
And so I think some of the things that we did was felinity exercises in New York. When we went back, we talked about, hands and fingers, that cats don't have fingers, and how do you crawl, how do you stand, the visceral usage of the spine and the back and the neck, the eyes, how you blink or how you would yawn or maybe cleanse yourself or just different things like that. And we talked a lot about that. We talked about relationships too. We learned a lot about the Grisabella relationship to the tribe and things like that, and exercises with that idea. And again, at that point, I was trying to not so much put everything from Pouncival behind me, but really start to form my relationship to this Rum Tum Tugger, to this Grisabella, to this, to this Pouncival, because I danced next to Pouncival as Mistoffelees, of course, and some of the tracking, and start to really understand how am I going to have relationships now fully in this character that I won't go back and forth from one to the other.
Yeah.
So that was neat too. And of course, seeing new people create the characters too is also interesting because you get so invested in how one cast performs and their idea of the cat, their idea of the delivery of the line or the movement. And now we have a whole other group. It's funny, when I started to do my makeup as Pouncival, I said I joined the national tour of squirrels versus cats because I couldn't do my makeup right. I was just slopping the makeup on with heavy hands, and there were so many beautiful people. And I know you did an interview with Joey Abramowitz, and Joey had, hands down to this day, the most exquisite makeup, steady hand, shading on his face. I mean, it was just always beautiful. And then Joey was like me, did several productions after the tour, and just always I was inspired and enamored with his makeup and how great it was. So yeah, it took some time to get that down. For sure. Yeah.
So I want to hear about a couple of things. Then I want to hear about some of the other productions you did after, since I know you did a few, and those are very different when you start talking regional or a couple of weeks. But you kind of told me when we were emailing back and forth about a couple of things that I didn't know as much about. So I want to hear about the new Mistoffelees entrance.
Yeah.
And I want to hear about this costume change, the velvet costume change that you got to help, I guess, pioneer. What was tell me these stories.
So as we went into my second year on the tour, they doubled the cities, and a lot of the fly spaces and even just the stage space was either smaller or not conducive enough for some of the special effects that we had in the show. So of course we know that Grisabella rides this pod at the end after what we call Big Memory, and she goes up into the heaviside layer. And the typical entrance is that Mistoffelees would come through that pod on the rope and do the magical entrance with the flashing lights and the costume and so forth. Well, that was not always going to be able to take place at all the theaters that were being booked because the fly space would not allow for me to ride an elevator up, cross the catwalk, and then come down. And that was typically how it was. I would ride this sort of mechanical elevator to the top. There would be somebody in the fly space. I would walk across. A red light would go on. I would get set up in the foot loop and the wrist loop. I would fly through the pod and spin down. So they brought that to my attention, and I said, okay, sure, and they said the first entrance that they wanted me to do to keep it the same was the rope would come down after the McCavity fight, and there's this blackout before the Rum Tum Tugger starts to say, you ought to ask the magical Mr. Mistoffelees.
Yeah.
And because all the electricity has been blown because of the fight. So they said the rope would come down. You're going to come out on the stage in the dark. You're going to put your foot in it, grab onto the wrist loop, and we're going to fly you up next to the pod We just can't have you go through a catwalk, but we can get you next to it. And I was like, oh, okay. And that was going to be a really long time to hang in the rafters of the fly space before I would come back down. And truth be told, even 15 or 20 seconds that I would wait in the original entrance was kind of fatiguing enough because you're squeezing on, you're holding yourself there until they say go, and then you have to release a hand, push yourself to spin. And I was like, okay. And I was always game for it. I was honored to be doing this role. It was a dream role of mine, but I could see how that was going to be difficult. And then I brought it to their attention. I said, well, the sensors for the jacket are on my fingers. And if I'm grabbing that rope and I touch those sensors, I'm going to start lighting up as I'm flying up, So they were like, oh, they had not really processed that part of it. So immediately they scratched that idea. And then they had this idea that in certain spaces, if we couldn't fly me down, that I was going to enter upstage on the tire, which there was this wooden plank. They were going to cut an insert into the wooden plank so this very bright bluish light would shine up from underneath my feet. And I was going to be in this, postured pose with my arms up, like, ta-da, here I am. And from the ceiling, they were going to release a huge Mylar glitter bag. So there would be glitter that was falling around me. And they were big circles, about a 1-inch circle of Mylar that would fall. And I was like, sure, And then they're like, you'll just run down the tire, do a big jeté, and, there you are for presto. And we go on. I was like, okay, great. And that really became the entrance. And they showed it to me, and it really was quite beautiful. And the lights and how they made it happen, because all of a sudden, there I was. I would run on at the last second, and it was beautiful. And so that was kind of the entrance. And that became about 80%, if not more, of my entrances on that year, because the space was so small. I don't remember flying too much last year.
Did you get to a theater and you're just like, they've got the rope, or they're like, oh, this is like, did you prefer one over the other?
No, they were both fine. I think what it would do is it would just cut into my warm up a little bit, because there's a lot of sitting in Act 2 for Mistoffelees while the Macavity number goes on, the fight, other things that happen that I'm changing costumes and then I sit. So I would start to warm up, and I would do the same warm up every single night. That was just enough to get me ready to do the solo specifically. Knowing that I had to do toe touches, turns in second, and a couple kicks or whatnot. I just needed to make sure that part of my body that late in the evening was ready to do that dance every night. So it was a minimal specific warm up. So it just basically meant that I couldn't do all of that. And then I would have to go in enough time to get up to fly down.
Yeah.
But I didn't mind either or. So,
yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So that was the first time that they really did this, because it's like they have to. You have to adjust to what you've got space-wise.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me about the costume, the velvet costume.
Yeah, so the original design, of course, back in the early 80s, stretch velvet was just not a thing. And so the idea of the costume is sort of a matador, high-waisted pants, bolero style, if you will. And the velvet that would be on the costume was not stretched. The jacket wasn't stretched. The tunic top was not stretched. It fit, but it was not... It was like basically having a curtain fabric as your costume. But then there would be lycra gussets down the legs and in between the legs, of course, for flexibility and extensional purposes, of course. And I wore some of those original design costumes as an understudy, and so did the other Mistoffelees before me as well. And they built all new costumes for this new tour that came out my second year into the process. All new unitards, colored, new fur on it, new warmers and everything. So the Mistoffelees costume, they told me, they were like, we're building a costume that's never been produced before for this character. And I said, do you mean the design is changing? Like, I was just curious what that meant. And they were like, no. The fabric is going to be fully stretched velvet. It's going to be so much more comfortable for you. It's going to have a lot more give and stretch, of course. And it was beautiful. The entire costume was solid black velvet. I got to meet the two women that did all of the hand beading on it and that put, 180 fiber optics throughout the jacket.
Wow.
It was really special. My opening city that year was Biloxi, Mississippi, and they came to the theater for different reasons or whatnot. And I got to meet them on opening night, and it was really nice. And the costume itself was, I think, like close to $40,000 to build.
Wow.
Yeah, it was brand new. And
was it noticeable difference for you, like in the dancing?
Yes, it was much more comfortable. The whole entire leg of the costume was straight velvet down. And it just gave so much more ease into especially the jumps at the end. It just made the gigantic jump sequence at the end just so much more comfortable and easy to do. So I don't know how they build them now. I see a lot of them that, and it was built for me specifically, like down into the gloves. It was one piece into the hands. So, and I was actually a tall Mistoffelees. I'm close to 5'9". I fabricate a little bit on my resume. I'm really 5'8", but I was a tall Mistoffelees. Typically, they're 5'5", 5'6" or so. And even my white cat, Katie Warner, she's now Katie Harris. She was beautiful. She was a tall Victoria as well. We had a lot of taller individuals that played, but we understood the movement as making ourselves small at that time. So, yeah.
That's so interesting. I've never would have thought about like the evolution of all this stuff. Like I figured sets and dance, like the technology you can do, like the lights, everything. But the fact that like your suit is going to make it easier for you to dance and probably less injuries because you got more mobility. Like as an athlete, like I played hockey growing up, and like the evolution of our hockey sticks, like from what I play with now versus what I play with as a kid is half the weight, a fraction of it. And it's just so cool to hear the like parallels of that. It's like, oh, you finally have a costume that you can like really move in, and it makes everything easier. So,
no, it was great. It was great.
We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back for more of The Wrong Cat Died.
I want to ask a little bit about the other parts of your tour. So
sure.
There's always before we go to the regional productions and the other stuff, there's always some fun, crazy, memorable stories and moments from tour. So what are the ones that stand out in your mind of like, this was some funny moments, or this was a chaos that happened? Like, this is one of my favorite parts to hear, especially it seems like the fifth tour, went for 10, 15 years, whatever, went on for a long time. And there was some stuff.
I think the first thing that comes to mind is, I think many people from that year would remember the Mistoffelees splat as a bug. So before Grisabella sings The Big Memory, she comes back out for an entrance. And of course, we all recognize her and we make our opinions and we scurry away, run away. And we all have our placements around the stage where we need to get to. And I was one of the last cats that would sort of look at her, make the choice to turn away from her and then run up to the tire. So I've done the Mistoffelees solo. She comes out. I'm always out of breath a little bit. So, of course, I'm trying to compose myself, stand there, make my, feline opinion about this cat that comes out, and then run up. And I was the last one before she would sing Memory. And my foot slipped on the step that would lead up to the tire. I would sit in the middle. And I was next to Cassandra. And I was next to Mungo Jerry on the tire. So I sat in between them, and they were already placed. So I'm standing there. Anne Brummel was my Grisabella at the time. And I'm looking at her. I make my opinion. I turn. I run very autopilot, because I do this obviously 8 times a week, run away. And my foot slipped on the step. And I literally splat onto, and it wasn't a silent splat. I splat onto the top of the steps, grabbing onto the tire, and all I could do, because she is now singing the first soft part of the song, which obviously has the bigger portion at the end, all I could do was just slowly melt down to the floor very subtly, because of course I am directly upstage of her. There's a spotlight on her, and I'm in this very sparkly costume. So you're seeing me directly behind her. So it's like splat on a window like a bug. And then I just slither down. And everybody on the stage is laughing. Anne knew something had happened. Of course, we talked about it afterwards. And she was like, I just wanted to turn around and see what was going on, what had happened. And I knew it was you because you're the last one to run away. So that was always something that that I always think of on tour. And I'm quite a clumsy person, which is, I don't talk about too often, but I trip and trip over my own feet sometimes. So I'm not surprised that happened. There was always really fun internal games that we would play on stage that I hope that the audience wouldn't pick up on. That was, for the cast to know about or whatnot, which is probably something that choreographers and directors don't want to hear that we do. But I think there's always a little something that happens on stages sometimes that keep us, connected as a cast. But
are you willing to tell some of those? Because I've always assumed that happens, because like otherwise 8 times a week of the exact same thing, like you have to have some fun or some like to keep it fresh without obviously changing the story and the experience for people, but it's live and you've got to do a little bit there. So
there's 2 very specific moments that I remember that happened, and one was during Skimbleshanks, and I was not a part of Skimbleshanks as Mistoffelees, so I only heard about this, but I know that it happened because I kind of peeked around from the wings to see it happening. So Skimbleshanks is on stage telling his story, doing his number, and all the cats are lying around on the floor in a semicircle looking up to him, facing upstage. And, cats are enamored idealistically with something that they can paw and toss around, and so in a way that was still staying in character. I can't remember specifically who. I think I know who it is, but we'll keep that.
Yeah.
Someone pulled out, and brace yourself, someone pulled out the cotton portion of a tampon, and they threw it around on the stage and tossed it from person to person as Skimbleshanks was doing his Railway Cat song. And so things like that would happen. Now, I don't know if you could see that from like a balcony view looking down or not. I also know that there was a dare that at the top of Act 2, this is probably a little more than I should share. But we come out for what's called moments of happiness, and everything is just okay. We're with Old Deuteronomy. He is making choices of what's going to happen next in this journey of the story. And we kind of just have a calm, elegant moment where we're there. As cats do, we sit still, we feel the warmth and the space, the comfort of where we're laying, where we're sitting or whatnot. And we dared somebody to go out onto the stage without their dance belt under their unitard. So I don't know how visible that was, but it was definitely an acknowledgement to us for one of the male characters to do that. So that definitely happened.
Would that, I was gonna say, is that noticeable? Is that something an audience member could pick up on?
Probably not. But it was funny, I guess, internally for us at that time. I'm giving you lots of X stuff, I guess.
Yeah, I would have never thought that's anything like.
There is a moment where there's a build, what we call the swell in the music, where we would stand up. And we're having this moment, and we're very present and looking out into the space of the junkyard. And so visibly, yes, we're no longer in a cat-like position or whatnot. We are now standing up. And so not that any audience member would pick up on that, but it was just a funny moment for us that,
I love it.
Yeah.
All right. I want to fast forward now. How many regional productions after did you do? Or how many other times have you done cats after the tour?
I did two other regionals.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where were they? Tell me more about these.
I did one at Virginia Musical Theater in, I think it's Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Okay.
And I did one, I don't know that this theater is still around, but it was in Long Island. It was Smithtown Center for the Performing Arts, just outside of Manhattan. So a train ride away.
Yeah.
So I did two, both as Mistoffelees. In the Smithtown production, there was a lot of, that was a rocky production, and a lot of wonderful people in the company, but I ended up actually playing Munkastrap. I was the dance captain because I knew the show, et cetera, et cetera. And there were several others that had done cats, and actually one other guy from my tour was with me as well, or maybe two. There was a couple of us. Anyhow, the Munkastrap had left, and they needed somebody to step in. And so I obviously knew the tracking. And so I jokingly called myself Mini Monkey because I was too short to play Munkastrap, but I tried so hard to broaden my shoulders and get that stance that he would always have in that leadership, position out. So I definitely went on as Monkastrap, which was quite interesting to do. Yeah.
That's
that
fun.
production was interesting.
Okay. I'm not going to ask any follow-ups there. I love the regional stuff can get a little wild, and it's just different because you're doing it for a couple of weeks. So there's a lot less of it's less of the story, more about the dancing and more about the let's make sure we get this production on. And because you're going to probably do 3 weeks, 4 weeks at the time, or
yeah, the Virginia Musical Theater one was, they have a unique schedule. They still operate this way where they rehearse for 3 weeks and do one weekend of shows, 5 shows, and it's hit it and quit it. I had a wonderful, wonderful cast in that production. Stephanie Lane Bittner, who was Cassandra on Broadway, set this show, and it was wonderful to learn it from her from back in. She was actually the Cassandra that I saw in 1994, which is really interesting as well. And so it's great to work with her. But Cesar Samayoa, who is a Broadway veteran now, was our Gus and Growl Tiger. Adrienne Warren, who played Tina and other wonderful Broadway roles, she was actually going into her senior year at the governor's school there in Virginia, and she played Demeter. So she was already powerhousing it as a junior in high school on the stage. So it was great to work with her in that capacity. And we're still friends to this day. She lives in Harlem and we run into each other on the subway. So it's still we talk about that time every now and then. I don't see her too often because her career has taken her to so many other areas. But and then Grant Gustin, who was also well known for, I think he was on Glee for a minute, but he's well known for playing the Flash on CW. He was my Mungo Jerry. And I remember I had a soft spot for him because his mom would always come to rehearsals and film what he learned that day to go home and practice. And so it very much reminded me of the love and care of my parents, always being around. And so that was very sweet. I haven't seen or spoken to Grant since that, but it's just so nice to see his, magnitude of success at this point and what he went on to do. There's just such talent in that cast, such talent, and people that have really risen in their careers. So
it's so fun to hear because you hear all the stories of these kind of early stages of a regional production, and it's you're early on in your career, you're feeling it out, you're learning, and then you take off and do all these other really cool stuff. And so it's I'm sure it's the fun for you of you can tell probably at that point being like, oof, this person's going to be a star. Especially now, a lot of the regional productions has some high school kids jump in and some some other things where it's they're still very, very early in a career.
Yeah, it's great too, because every area has, talent within their community. And so it's great when they get to mesh that within the professional world and they get to learn, what it's like and get to hear stories of the lifestyle of being the actor, if that's what they're trying to go into. And you become friends. And those are great resources to have if you do go to such and such city, whether it's LA, New York, Chicago, and somebody there, you now have a friend or a resource to call upon for questions or, mentorship. So it's really great for the community to be involved as well sometimes.
Totally. Super fun. Let's do some rapid fire. I'm ready to hit you with a couple of the important questions here.
Yeah.
So if you could go on for one day, one night, any track in Cats, whether it's male, female, whether you can dance it, sing it, who would you want to go on as?
Cassandra.
Ooh.
Yeah. The makeup is fire. It's amazing.
Okay.
There's just something great about that cat. She's stunning.
Love it. Who are your favorite and least favorite characters of Cats? Who bugs you? Who do you love? Ignore actors and performers, purely cat personalities.
We could go without a McCavity.
Okay.
And I think probably my favorite would be Victoria, besides Mistoffelees, of course.
Yeah. Okay. What is your favorite song in the show?
Skimble Shanks.
Love it.
And as Mistoffelees, I was taken out, I'm not a part of that routine. So,
so it's your break. That's why you love it.
That's my break in changing costumes. But I loved it. I think the number is so jubilant and fun. And there's such a great spirit about it. And I always loved it. And I would sing it backstage. And as Pouncival, I got to experience that number, but not as Mistoffelees. So, yeah.
Okay. My fun question. I always like to ask one fun one. I know that you run a dance studio. You own a dance studio. Which cat, and I feel like there's probably multiple, would be the best cat at opening a dance studio? Like, who would be the best running one?
Oh, Jelly Loram.
Jelly Loram. Ooh.
Jelly Loram. She's like the mom, the one that little girls or little boys would love and that she would take care of and be tender with and make sure their, psyches are protected and make sure that they are nurtured and make sure that they feel good every time they come to class, and would be great with the parents if there's questions. I just feel like there's such a device within her spirit taking care of Gus that I feel like she would be great with kids, if you know what I mean, and take care of that and nurture that spirit. So they would want to come back and see Miss Jelly Loram every week in ballet class or jazz class or whatever.
You're totally right. I've asked this question a lot about teachers.
That is an interesting question. I've never thought about that.
I've asked it a lot of teachers. I like to think about if we take the cats outside of the cat world, like what would they be good at?
Oh gosh.
And so I've always thought it was Jenny. Jenny would be like the most like the studious teacher. Like she's.
I could see that too because she's like very militant, And
I would
definitely say her too. Yeah.
Skimbleshanks is running my operations. Bustiver's funding. Like, I've got some of this planned out. And then like Mistoffelees and Tugger would be my like special guest teachers every once in a while.
I love that.
Really bring in some chaos into the crowd. I always called them the substitute teachers for like regular school.
Yeah.
But yeah.
They keep the kids hype and excited when they show up.
Yeah, you got to come in. They're probably not going to do any of the lesson plan, but they're gonna but they're gonna come in and still have some fun.
Of course.
Okay, $1 million question. This whole podcast is centered around the idea that I don't think Grisabella is the right Jellicle choice. So I want to hear from you, Jane. If you are Old Deuteronomy, if you're picking, who are you sending and why?
Oh my God, this is like, who am I voting off of? Like, I don't know, some reality TV show. Who would I choose? Oh my gosh. I think maybe Gus.
Love it.
I think maybe Gus. And I think we get to know more of Gus than we know more of Grisabella. And I think that because of the production and the way that they produce his storyline and the flashback to the pirates, I think there's a more sympathetic heart for Gus that we want. And we see his age as well. And we know that Grisabella has a dilapidation, as they call it. And, she is a has-been of this tribe and this world. But I think that they don't flesh her story out as much as they do for Gus, and I think that it's just so beautiful and to see that he goes, I hate this word I'm going to say, but that he would go peacefully at that point. You know what I mean? I think that that's who my vote would be.
I love it. Yeah. It's not an uncommon vote. It's the number 2 vote right now.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I think there's a very big Team Gus contingency out in the world. For why, and I'm all for it. I'm really all for any non-Grisabella vote, but there is a big Gus. I think it's exactly what you said. Like he's an older character. He tells his story. You get to kind of really experience his life. He looks like he needs it.
Yeah.
Versus Grisabella that's kind of like coming in midway through. Here's my 15 minutes on stage is all I'm going to give you, and this is why I need it, type of thing. So if you ignore the redemption arc.
Of course.
Grisabella, I love it.
And you only get just a little bit of her backstory with Baum and Demeter singing what they sing in Act 1 about her when she comes out for her first entrance. And so if you're paying attention or realizing that that is important information based around Grisabella's existence, that's all you really get. And then you have to put 2 and 2 together that she was something, and there are cats that are drawn to her, want to help her, but then there's a scorn about it and a push away about it. And so you have to pay attention to that. And then, of course, she continues in her stature and her, fight for it all to sing memory and tell the rest of it, Yeah.
So if you were staging the show and you got free reign to like add more of her story, let's say we want to stick to her being there, what would you want to tell the the audience, and where would you try to slide that in?
You don't see Grisabella in the opening. Now, the character comes out in a neutralized costume.
Yeah.
So they're on the stage, but you don't know that that's Grisabella. The same for Tugger. I think that there could be more information about her in the entrance, the naming of cats, and we see her more. I don't know that it would be... the naming of cats were all in one tableau and blocking in a formation. But so would she stand with us as we're just like overviewing all of the cats as one without opinions toward each cat, or, anything like that? Or, how would that work? But I could see the opening being a little more developed for her to be visible in that. Maybe there's choices about her during that time that we see, or a little bit more information or script musically created for her at that time. I don't know. Maybe that's a great place because we don't see her as Grisabella in that opener.
What if you had her like off on the side doing the like trying to dance with you all?
Yeah. I mean, because she does that,
she does
frequently.
That later on, yeah.
Mm-hmm. She tries to mimic the ball and the movement, and of course, it's something that she used to do, and of course, aches and pains, age, whatever, take over. But yeah, I think that that's a great place that we could see more of her development in the opening.
I love it. I think there's more ways to throw her in and tell her story. Like I've learned a lot of it over the years, but you aren't given a ton, to your point.
Right.
It's like if you heard the early part, you see them shun her in Act 1, and then you're coming in and you're pretty much going to hear the belt of memory.
Right.
And then bye, then she's going up, hopefully, the pod, if she can go up the pod, depending on the place, I guess.
Of course.
This has been super fun. How can people stay in touch with you, learn about the dance studio, and know more about you?
Oh my goodness. I have an Instagram handle. It's Shane Hall Creates. Very as it is, ShaneHallCreates, Shane Hall Creates on my Instagram. And my studio is Prodigy Dance Center. We're located in Columbus, Georgia. You can find that Prodigy Dance GA on Instagram. Prodigy Dance Center GA, that's RE, spelled the French spelling. Or you can Google Prodigy Dance Center, Columbus, Georgia. Celebrating 16 years in business, and it's so wonderful to take all of this experience. And of course, I'm still based in New York, to give to all these great kids in my community and give back and share the love of theater and help them. If they want to go into the industry, give them as much as I've learned, and, feed them and nurture them to be great performers and respectful artists and kind people to go out into this world. So
that's so amazing. We'll link both so people can find everything. You. And this has been so much fun. Thanks for coming on, telling the story.
Oh my gosh, thank you I haven't talked about cats in years, so this has been a joy.
That's what I'm here for. I'm making people reminisce about things that they should not or have not been thinking about.
I love it.
Oh, this has been awesome. So thank you. And thanks everyone else for listening to this episode of The Wrong Cat Died, the podcast breakdown of the catastrophe. To follow along, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else listen to podcasts. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at The Wrong Cat Died, or check our website, thewrongcatdied.com.